Since today is the Feast of Trumpets, we have a special portion outside of the regular cycle. It's entitled Rosh HaShanah, which means head of the year. When I saw Genesis 21 on today's commentary schedule, I wondered what it had to do with this holiday. I did some looking around and found that Genesis 21 and 22 are both traditionally read for Rosh HaShanah. And apparently there's some mystery why. I came across a sermonette by Rabbi Josh Levy. There's a question that I get asked every year, to which I always give a pitifully weak answer. Why are these the Torah readings for Rosh Hashanah? Why Genesis 21 and 22? In truth, we do not know. He then went on to give a couple possible explanations. We'll look at one of them. One convincing, if spiritually disappointing explanation, in his opinion, is that the Torah readings of Rosh Hashanah are actually polemical meaning controversial. In the early Christian tradition, and remember Christianity and Rabbinic Judaism grew up intertwined with one another, the birth of Isaac was linked with the miracle birth of Jesus. God's remembering of Sarah with a child as foreshadowing a visiting of Yeshua's mother, Mary. Genesis 21 was a scriptural reading for the days which were associated with Jesus' birth in the early Christian calendar before December 25th became the day. So he's saying before Christians celebrated Christmas, they would read Genesis 21 to celebrate Yeshua's birth at a different time of the year. Similarly, the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, is known in early Christianity tradition as the sacrifice of Isaac, and a direct link is made to the death of Jesus, another sacrifice of a son. So by selecting these passages for Rosh Hashanah, the early rabbis claimed them as their own. So he's acknowledging how Christians saw Isaac's birth and near sacrifice as prophetic of the birth and sacrifice of Yeshua. Now, I've heard different schools of thought of when Jesus was actually born, but usually it's in the fall feast time frame which we're entering today. As this rabbi describes it, the Christians in the past were reading Genesis 21 during this time to celebrate Yeshua's birthday. The rabbis back then wanted to reclaim the passage, separating it from Christianity, so they made it the Torah reading for the first fall feast day. Now, if that's true, the rabbis actually ended up further enforcing the fall holy days as prophetic templates of Jesus. We are now kicking off the fall feast season with the Torah reading prophetic of Yeshua's birth and sacrifice. A few years ago, I gave a commentary for Vayera, the Torah portion containing Genesis 21 and 22. I went over several of the links Rabbi Levi was referring to in his sermonette. Here's a recap of the connections covered in that commentary and the passages I used for each. The blue items are related to their births. The yellow ones are related to their sacrifices. There's a supernatural declaration of each conception. Neither mother should have been able to get pregnant. The mothers actually had opposite reactions to the announcements. Isaac was called Abraham's only son, and Yeshua is God's only son. 2 other men were involved with both sacrifices. Both accounts reference the third day. Both sacrifices involved fire and blades, and both sons carried their own wood. Both were offered by their fathers. In both cases, God provided a sacrificial lamb, Jesus being our sacrificial lamb. Both were bound to wood, and both were alive after the sacrifices. If you'd like to watch the full commentary, it's available on my YouTube channel. But I did skip a couple verses in it. Genesis 22:13. Then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, "The Lord will provide," as it is said to this day, "In the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." These verses also have prophetic significance of Yeshua. The fact it's a burnt offering is prophetic of Jesus, which I had already covered in a previous commentary another time I had the Vayera portion. So today I will present how the ram was prophetic of Yeshua. specifically in three aspects: that it's 1, a ram; 2, it was caught in a thicket; and 3, it was caught by its horns. Let's go through the Tanakh and see how each of these terms are used elsewhere. The Hebrew word for ram is ayil. Rams are mentioned often for offerings and sacrifices. When the leaders made offerings in Numbers 7, bulls, rams, and lambs were often included together. For the periodic offerings in Numbers 28 and 29, bulls, rams, and lambs were again often included together. Interestingly, earlier in Genesis 22 we read, in verse 7, "But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, 'My father.' And he said, 'Here I am, my son.' Then he said, 'Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?' And Abraham said, 'My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering.' So the two of them went together. Abraham said God would provide a lamb, and God provided a ram. We see rams and lambs used synonymously a lot in the context of offerings. Yeshua was referred to as a lamb. John 1:29, the next day John saw Jesus coming toward him and said, 'Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world.' John called Jesus a lamb that would take away our sin. Yeshua died in place of our sin the way the ram was sacrificed in place of Isaac. 1 Corinthians 5:7, therefore purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. For indeed Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us." Paul called Jesus our Passover, sacrificed for us. At Passover, a lamb was sacrificed. The ram was offered in Isaac's place as Jesus was offered in our place. But why a ram instead of a lamb in this case? Why make that distinction? Let's look at how else ayil, the Hebrew word for ram, was used in the Tanakh. Sometimes ayil is translated to mighty or mighty men. For example, the original Hebrew of Exodus 15:15 had ayil and was translated to a Greek word in the Septuagint that means lords. Daniel 8:20, the ram which you saw having the two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. In Daniel 8, Daniel had a vision involving a ram and a goat. Verse 20 stated that the ram, the ayil, represented kings. So the ayil also represents leaders and powerful men. John 18:36, Jesus answered Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." And there are several other passages that also refer to Jesus as king. Revelation 17:14, "These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful." So here the Lamb, Yeshua, is specifically called the King of Kings. Not only is the ram prophetic of Jesus as an offering, but also as a king. And there are also times where ayil is used another way. Ayil is used for posts throughout Ezekiel 40, when Ezekiel was shown the vision of the temple. And when I read of posts in the Bible, I often think of how Jesus was crucified on a cross. The ram dying for Isaac alone is prophetic of how Jesus, the King of Kings, would die on a cross as an offering for us. Thicket gives some more details. The Hebrew word here is sabak and comes from the Hebrew word sabak. Sabak means to interweave, and we see this when we look at how it was used elsewhere in the Tanakh. Like in Job 8:17, his roots wrap around the rock heap and look for a place in the stones. Sabak here is translated to wrap around. Sabak is where the forest vegetation would be interwoven. A couple times the Tanakh mentions thorns with the sabak. The ram's horns on its head were caught in a thicket that probably included thorns. Jesus was crowned with interwoven thorns. The ram's head caught in the thicket was prophetic of Jesus being crowned with thorns at his crucifixion. They called him a king, just as the ram can represent a king. And so we're already getting quite a picture of Yeshua's sacrifice. And now let's look at horns. The Hebrew word for horn is keren. Along with it used elsewhere for the horns on the heads of animals, we see horns on the courtyard altar. In Exodus 27:1, "You shall make an altar of acacia wood, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. The altar shall be square, and its height shall be 3 cubits. You shall make its horns on its 4 corners. Its horns shall be of one piece with it, and you shall overlay it with bronze." The altar had a horn on each of its 4 corners. Let's look at what was done with these horns. When Aaron and his sons were consecrated as priests, they put the blood of the sacrificial animal on the horns of the altar. Blood was also placed on the horns of the altar for atonement on Yom Kippur. And blood was placed on the 4 horns for sin offerings. So the blood was placed on the horns, and the horns were located on the 4 corners of the altar. John 20:25, "The other disciples therefore said to Thomas, 'We have seen the Lord.' So he said to them, 'Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe.' And after 8 days his disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, 'Peace to you.' Then he said to Thomas, 'Reach your finger here, and look at my hands, and reach your hand here, and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing.'" And there are articles stating that, historically, crucifixion also included nails in the feet. So the hands and feet would have been the 4 corners of Yeshua's body. So the sacrifice of the ram, whose horns were caught in a thicket, was prophetic of how Yeshua, the Lamb and King, would be sacrificed for us. He would be crowned with thorns and pierced on his 4 corners when nailed to the cross. And just as the ram died in the place of Isaac, Jesus died in our place. And just as Isaac survived, Yeshua survived. He rose from the grave to conquer sin and death on our behalf. There's one more usage of the word ayil I would like to look at in the account of the destruction of Jericho. Joshua 6:2. "And the Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have given Jericho into your hand, its king and the mighty men of valor.'" Verse 5. "It shall come to pass when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the trumpet, that all the people shall shout with a great shout. Then the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up every man straight before him." So we also see another tie of today's portion to the Feast of Trumpets. The horns also represent victory. To tie in with what we looked at today, Yeshua's sacrifice gives us victory over sin and death. Let's keep that in mind as we blow our shofars today. This day and this season of holy days are to celebrate Jesus and the victory he has given us. Shabbat Shalom.